Hello, Dreamforce 2014! Yay! Oh, come on, we can do better than that. You're such a beautiful looking crowd. Come on, give me a yay. All right, that's much better. That's somewhat better. Okay, good enough. Well, without further ado, the 4 o'clock presentation is about bridging the gap between you, the lovely admin, and your developer. And I will now turn it over to Judy Sohn and Will Norse. Take it away.
Hey, welcome. Alrighty, so we'll start it out with a slide you haven't seen before, the safe harbor. We're not gonna show anything that's unreleased or talk about anything unreleased, but if you're thinking about anything unreleased, don't make your decisions on behalf of it. Yeah. Is it on? Okay. So to introduce myself, my name is Judy Sohn. I'm a Senior Solution Architect at Cal Partners, and we are a solution implementation partner that specializes in nonprofits. I've been there for about 2 years. Before that, I was Vice President of Operations of Fight Colorectal Cancer, a very small advocacy organization. And I self-implemented Salesforce there in 2006 and got very involved in the nonprofit community. I'd like to introduce my co-speaker, Will Nurse.
Thanks, Judy. I'm Will Nurse. I'm Vice President of Operations at Cloud for Good. We are also a Salesforce implementation partner and ISV. I've been at Cloud for Good for about 1.5 years. Before that was CIO at Citizen Schools, where I got involved in the platform and kind of bringing the organization on to Salesforce. Judy and I are both Salesforce MVPs, as well as certified various certifications.
All right. So why are we here? Back when I was at Fight Colorectal Cancer, I had no budget whatsoever. I've always been on the admin side of things, and there were so many things I wanted to do in my organization, and I thought, if only I had someone who could write me a trigger, if only I was a developer. And I came to Dreamforce, and I went to the developer zone, and I took the classes, and just did not have the time it took to really be able to implement and do what I needed to do in my organization. Learning to code takes time, and sometimes as an admin, you just don't have that time to really invest to figure out how to do it yourself. But then I went to Cal Partners as a consultant, and I had access to developers, and I had projects where I had to have people implement code. And I learned quickly that there are skills involved in getting other people to implement your ideas and make sure that it deploys successfully. That was a whole new skill set that I had to learn. So that's what we're going to cover in the next 18 minutes or so. Will and I both have experience working with developers, communicating requirements, and some of the things that you should be thinking about if you're in that situation where you're working with other people, whether it's people on your own staff, or if you're with nonprofits, people who volunteered, or any time that you're dealing with those technical resources and you want to make sure that they're doing what you want them to do. Because if they don't, it ends up being more expensive in the long run. So we're going to start out kind of talking about some things you should be thinking about in the design and build stage. Will's going to cover that. I'm going to come back and talk about what you should be thinking about when you're testing their work.
Thanks, Judy. One of the things, and this is especially as admins, that you really should be thinking about from a Salesforce perspective is if you can possibly do it first with clicks or in the declarative model, should really evaluate that thoroughly before you go down the path of writing code. So the simplest way of getting developers to write code is not having to write code at all. So clearly, kind of think about that. You got a bunch of different options you can take into account when looking at this. Rather than writing a fresh Visualforce page to do something, look at Visual Workflow. Right, it gives you a lot of capabilities right out of the box. Gives you the ability to maintain and customize much more than you might imagine at first. Second, think about, can you use workflow instead of writing a trigger? And if you've had a chance, even today, to take a look at some of the new Lightning Process Designer capabilities that are coming down the line, your ability to actually do complex actions that up to today would take a trigger is quickly moving into the hands of admins like yourselves. And so, if you haven't had a chance, make sure you do take a look over the next couple of days and see what's coming down the pike there. It's really, really exciting. And then third, you've got the App Exchange, right? You have a whole ecosystem of applications that have already been built that may well, resolve the issues that you're thinking of. And so really do those evaluations before going down the path of getting a developer to write something for you. I think the second piece around clicks versus code is how do you broaden your perspective? I talked just a minute ago about the Lightning process developer. That's brand new. So get a sense of know what's coming down the pike. Coming to Dreamforce is your best bet for doing that. But staying involved in the community, going to events like the Salesforce One events that are traveling around the country and around the world, giving you an opportunity to preview new content and all of that, because what that does is it helps you become an expert on the platform and not just your job, right? The best admins that I know are the folks who really take hold of the platform as a solution for their organization. They don't just do admin stuff, and they're really become visionaries and leaders within their organization by going down that path. So as an admin, as a CIO, as a business analyst, what I often think about is that when I'm talking to a developer, it's often easiest if I follow from that picture is worth 1,000 words idea. You've got to remember that developers, by and large, are not designers. If you give a developer and say, "Hey, I want a Visualforce page to do something," they're going to do it most likely, and this is not universal. I don't want to kind of catch them all in the same in the same category, but by and large, it's going to be pretty utilitarian. Field A followed by field B followed by field C. That doesn't lead to a great user experience for your end users, and so if you can draw out what it is that that you want the page to look like, or even better, what your users want the page to look like, you're going to have that much more successful an end product when it comes around to handing it over. Additionally, pictures really help reduce ambiguity. So if you can draw a quick prototype that shows, okay, this is how it's going to be laid out, a workflow diagram that shows, or a process diagram that shows step A leads to step B, there's a decision at step C, you can go then to D or to E. All of those become much easier ways to either have a conversation and clarify how things are going to work, as well as clarify your own your own thinking as you go through the process. And finally, the pictures are really useful for communicating with your end users. Often people, especially that we run into, they don't really believe it until they see it. And doing a prototype, doing a picture can really help reduce some of the ambiguity for them, and give you the sense of a conversation going back and forth. Much better, get access to what they're thinking and what they really want at the end of the day. Third point to talk about is really don't assume anything. You want to make sure that you're covering all the bases, all the scenarios that can happen. If you're talking about a trigger and you want to evaluate, what kind of data is coming in on a record, and when that trigger fires, how are you going to account for the different options that might happen if you have less data than you expect, or if some data doesn't quite match up with what you're expecting as part of your trigger criteria. So you want to think about all of those different pieces. In a lot of ways, doing this is like a game of telephone. You as an admin are interpreting what your end users are telling you that they need. Your developers are interpreting what it is that they think you need. And so, if you do make assumptions, by and large, you're going to get burned at some point in the process. You're never going to be 100%, right? You can't be bulletproof. But to the extent that you really think through step by step what's going to happen, and evaluate and think about, okay, how do I shift off, or what will happen if we shift off, you're going to be much more successful. Map out all the different scenarios, as I said, and then really think about how do you break down complex functions into smaller components. Right, often when a user says, I want something to do A, B, and C, a developer is going to start from the bottom up. They're going to say, okay, what happens when I do A? And then what happens when B happens? And then what happens when C happens? And so if you're able to break it down for them in advance, you're going to have a better conversation with the developer around, and be able to, which ultimately leads to better testing when you come down the line. And this may be my final point, I can't remember, but don't assume anything. Sorry, I did that. Don't just throw it over the wall is really the piece. Working with developers should be a case of ongoing communication. You don't just write a spec, say, okay, go build it, and then expect it to come back and work exactly the way that you want it to, even if you follow the steps that I talked about above. It's never going to be a one and done situation. Expect to have the conversation, build in the time to do that, and really, the metaphor I use is treat it like you're building a house, right? You wouldn't hand over a set of plans or a description of the house you want to build to a general contractor and expect it to come out anything like you're going to build or that you're going to want. So think about how do you spell it out for them in detail. How do you communicate with them over the course of the project what they're building for you? Schedule periodic reviews of the work. If it's a big multiple Visualforce page project, don't say bring it back to me in a month. Say, okay, here's page 1. What does it look like? Give them feedback. Iterate through. Iterative development works equally as well for you as the admin as it does for development teams. Don't rely on email or written documents alone, right? This is the conversation. As with a picture being worth 1,000 words, 1,000 words spoken can be worth 500,000 words written, because what you write, there are different. Often, if you're working with an offshore development team, which frequently happens, but even if you're not, there are nuances in language that if you're having a phone conversation or an in-person meeting with someone, you're going to get at the heart of the matter that much more quickly, and your end result, better product. And this is my final point before I hand over to Judy. Plan for maintainability, right? Code is not, your business is not static. Your organization changes, business rules change, requirements change. As you're building code or as you're expecting someone to write code, think about what are the things that could change in my organization over the next 6 months or a year. It could be something as simple as a commission calculation. If you've got a standard commission percentage, if that commission percentage were to change 6 months or a year down the line, and it's hard-coded into your code, your developer's got to go back in and change it. You've got to test everything. You've got a whole process that you've got to run back through. Think about using things like custom settings, so you can actually allow you as an admin can go in and make modifications which don't impact the code. A much simpler environment to work with. Think about how to make everything modular. Again, break things down into smaller components and make sure they can fit together well. And at the end of the day, it's a lot easier to change things that are done with the clicks, the declarative model, than it is with code. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Judy. She'll talk about how do you test what you've got once you've gotten it back.
Thanks, Will. Great information. So your developer has put things together. You followed all the steps that Will talked about, and now you really have to see, is this ready to go into your production org? Here's some tips you should be thinking about. So first, have a multi-stage test strategy. Don't just test it once and say, okay, deploy, we're ready. So break it up in kind of complex, not that complex, but a white box, gray box, black box. So a white box is the first, this is your developer. They know exactly what to expect. All the code is there for them. So what happens sometimes when a developer does something, they say, okay, Judy, you can test it. And I look and they didn't create any test records. They didn't actually, for themselves, go through the process first. Make sure they've done that, because some errors are going to be really clear if you see they tried to create that opportunity or account first and see their own code. Next up is really where you're important. That's where you know what's going to happen. You know what to expect. Maybe it's a developer sandbox, but you don't really necessarily know line-by-line code. Make sure you've tested that in a kind of an isolated place, samples, and I'll talk a little bit more about what you're thinking about with test data. And then the final is the black box. This is your full sandbox. This is testing the code with all your other integrations. This is testing a more real-world process. And only after it meets those criteria and it works, then you're ready to really plan for integrating it into your production environment. So what do you use to test? I really urge use real data. Even though it's great that Mickey Mouse closed a deal with Donald Duck to buy Disney World, that's gonna make it really challenging to really see that everything's working the way it should. Think about the real situation. Enter the data, even if it's a developer pro sandbox, use real situations. That's gonna highlight really what's still missing and what's not working correctly. And this is really important. Draft someone else. Don't just you. You are the one who wrote the requirements. You're making sure that it meets the requirements because you know you're looking for ways to make it work. When you bring in someone else, maybe a user, someone else on your team, so like your developers are also thinking about making it work, meeting the requirements. That person that you bring in to test, they're going to find what's wrong and they're going to break it. They're going to find that use case, that situation that you didn't consider, that fringe case. And so it's really important not just to rely on your own testing strategy, bring in someone else. And this is really important, your documentation. Don't forget it. Don't leave it out. So for the end user, I really highly recommend Screen Steps Live. That's where you take that new process or that new thing that you've implemented and you can really write it out for end users. Make sure you have something, if you've built custom objects and fields, that you are working that in, that you have something that defines how things are related to each other. Schema Builder is great, but there's some really easy third-party tools that you can use, Glyphy or Lucent Chart. And this is something, when you're working with the developer, at least in my experience, they are not writing the help text. They're not putting those descriptions for your admins in the description fields. They're not thinking about what is the end user seeing and what they should be doing with that new field. You need to be thinking about that and making sure that all those help fields are filled in. And you should be cataloging exactly what was done and how and what has changed. And a great tip before that is if you haven't been doing it as you've been going along, the View Setup Audit Trail is a great way of figuring out what you did. It's going to show that validation rule that you forgot or workflow rule, and or what profile changes need to be done as part of what you did. And finally, this is really important as well. Make sure that the developer you worked with has given you access or has saved that code away from Salesforce. A lot of times we think about backing up our data. We need to be also thinking about backing up the code. If they've used GitHub or some sort of repository, something for source control where they've written the code for you. If they're not an in-house person, maybe they're a consultant, just make sure if anything happens to that sandbox or anything's edited later or a problem, that you have a way of getting that original metadata back. And any questions? And thank you very much.